Thanks so much for joining. I'm Elisa Hebert. I'm the VP of Engineering Operations at Fairwinds. We are a Kubernetes governance and security organization. I came up through the business side, not through the sort of traditional engineering side to get to a VPE type title. And I've worked across all different kinds of organizations, from nonprofit through enterprise. And one of the big sort of constants in my career has been change. I've worked through a lot of M&As, mergers and acquisitions, in my own organizations and with customers. I've seen digital transformations starting back, 20 years ago, when people were literally going from a piece of paper to some sort of digital presence, like one of those, 5-page marketing websites, through, the transformation that we went through from a desktop to more responsive type experiences, and now moving to a world that's more cloud-based at large. So my goal in any role through my career has been to be helpful, and that's sort of the foundation of what we're gonna talk about today. So big changes require an anti-fragile approach. And that is true both in terms of the organization and in terms of you as an individual. So being emotionally elastic and anti-fragile is super important in terms of your ability to be successful, regardless of the size of your organization that you currently are today and where you're growing to, and regardless of where you sit in that organization. So both for the individual contributor all the way up through the executive suite, it's important to have sort of this perspective of anti-fragility and emotional elasticity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those, both in terms of the impact on you as an individual, on your team, and on your customers. So, thinking about positioning yourself for success, and you can think about that in terms of you as an individual. You can think about that in terms of your organization at large. The most important thing when you're thinking about change and growth is that you have to be a little bit comfortable with the unknown. You have to be able to think about understanding the difference between complicated and complex. We work in very complex environments, both in terms of interpersonal interactions and in the technology space. We just saw slides that had literal hundreds of icons across this ecosystem, right? So in the last presentation, and so thinking about how to handle complex systems without thinking about them in a complicated way. I think one of the most important things in terms of how to address this is the idea that having all of the requirements up front inspires a false sense of confidence. It makes us think that we know things that we just sort of fundamentally don't. So we want to have solution intent. So we want to have directional agreement that this is where we're trying to go. This is roughly the timeline we're trying to get there in, and this is sort of our thinking on how we get there. But constantly looking at that and repositioning and rethinking how that works is super important. And across this landscape, we're looking at how do these changes impact our people? How do these changes impact our process? And how do these changes impact our technology? And this is not new information for many folks, I'm sure, but that's sort of the framework for this. So thinking about organizational structure to drive the outcomes that you want. And people will sometimes say to me, like, I'm not in a leadership position. Why am I thinking about organizational structure? Well, organizational structure is important both from a leadership perspective and an individual contributor perspective. You want the best organizational structure to support you in your role, and you want the best organizational structure, if you're in a leadership position, to support the folks that report to you, matrixed or otherwise, to drive success and the outcomes that you want to see. So I once had a manager who talked about sort of the bus, right? Who's on the bus and are they in the right seats? And how do you need to continue to extend the team? What kinds of additional talent? What other folks do you need on the bus in order to get to where you're trying to go? Um, and whether you are an individual contributor or a leader in the organization, how can you be most helpful in the seat that you're in? Is there a different seat that you want to be in, and there are different skills that you need to get there, et cetera. And thinking about that in an elastic way, in an anti-fragile way, right? If you think about um, things that are rigid are more likely to break, and so the more flexible you can be, personally, professionally, organizationally, the more likely you are to be able to get to the kind of outcomes that you're looking for. So, in terms of the best organizational structure to drive the outcomes that you want for your team, right? People define teams in lots of different ways. There's lots of discussion about this. What is the definition of your team? Is it the people who are your peers? Is it the people you support? Is it the people higher than you in the hierarchy? But regardless of your definition, thinking about strategy versus tactics. What is the definition of protecting your team if you're in a position of power? Some people think it is sort of creating space for people to do their best work. My opinion is that it is both creating space for people to do their best work and empowering them with as much information as possible about the larger organization, about the direction that you're going in, about the strategy, the timelines, etc., and being clear when you don't know, being willing to say that you don't know. Fairwinds is a growing organization where I am now, and we are creating an organizational structure that can scale. So we're not as flat. We do have some hierarchy, especially on the engineering side, because we're thinking about, as we grow, how are we creating opportunities for people to step into bigger positions, test out their leadership skills, giving individual contributors the opportunity to drive individual programs or pieces of programs to sort of kick the tires on their own experience, start to feel good with leading pieces of things. So all of those things together, and learning as we go, and changing as we go, all of those things together help us be an anti-fragile organization, so that when people move up in the organization, when we grow and we need more folks, we have a little bit of the scaffolding there, and we have folks ready to step into new positions. So, thinking about our customers, um, there's a saying, right? You show me show me your budget, or some people will say, like, show me your OpEx, but show me your budget and I'll show you your strategy. The way that you spend money informs the reality of your strategy as an organization. And so, thinking about um, how are you including your customer's perspective in the structure of your organization? How are you thinking about making sure that you have an anti-fragile approach, and an elastic approach to handling your customers? So, in some environments, customers need a very bespoke experience. They need a lot of individualized attention. They need to be interacting with the same folks on a regular basis in order to really find value out of a service or a product. In other kinds of environments, customers can interact with a variety of folks, could have more of a help desk experience, don't need so much of a bespoke experience, but do need a rapid response to be able to find success. And so, making sure that your organizational structure, the way you're spending money to set that up, right, because it all has a cost implication, that your organizational structure really is set up to make sure that your customers have the absolute best experience possible, and that they are delighting in both your product and your service, or however you're set up, so that they continue to be both happy customers and potentially evangelists of what you have to offer. So I'm going to talk a little bit, sort of 5 tips for embracing change. These talks are always helpful when you come away with something a little bit more concrete. And so we're going to go through those, and then I'm happy to take questions if folks have questions at the end too. So I talked a little bit at the top here, but at its core, my goal is to be helpful. A day that I am helpful is a day that I consider, I've been successful. And so the core of that belief system for me is assuming good intentions. And uh, in order to assume good intentions, you have to be a little bit flexible. You have to be a little bit calm. The more stress you're under, the more quick reactions people tend to have. So your ability to reduce that stress, your ability to reduce your rigidity, your inflexibility is super important to your ability to assume good intentions in other people. Assume good intentions in decisions that people make. Assume good intentions in the approach that they have to things. And these pieces are going to tie together the 5 to, I hope, sort of be one piece together. But this is the core: is that anytime you are feeling frustrated with the direction that uh, is happening in terms of a change that's happening in technology and the impact that that's having on your process, or the impact that that's having on your people, assuming that the baseline of that decision was positive intent will be huge in order for you to find success, regardless of your role in the organization. The next one is give grace, because sometimes no matter how much you assume good intent, people mess things up. And giving both yourself and other people grace is super important. One of the biggest lessons for me that I've learned in my career is I have to give myself grace. And part of that is I need to be willing to fail publicly. And for me, this is a very important piece of how we run our engineering organization, in terms of giving, we talk a lot in especially more agile groups about fail fast. But you can only fail fast if people are willing to admit that they have failed. You have to be willing to say, this was not a success. We need to stop doing it and move on. And this will tie into a couple of the other pieces I talk about in a minute. But really being willing to say out loud, hey, this is the direction that we headed in. In some cases, it might be we changed a technology and it wasn't a success. And it wasn't a success because it had a negative impact on our people, or we weren't able to adjust our process in order to find success. We weren't able to adopt it the way that we wanted to. But that fundamental piece of assuming good intent and then giving grace when there is an error, is really critical to finding that flexibility. This one, clarifying strategy, is important across the board. So I'm gonna start at the top and sort of work down organizationally. So from a leadership perspective, clarifying strategy is your job on a very, very regular basis. I'm a big fan of the book Radical Candor, and there are a few things in Radical Candor that are sort of keystones for me in terms of the way that I lead our engineering organization. One of them is, it doesn't matter what your intent is. It doesn't matter the words that you're using. What matters is how your message lands in the other person's ear. And if people cannot hear what you are saying, you need to change the way you're saying it. So clarifying strategy could mean having one-on-ones with people to talk them through what's going on. It could mean having decks for people to review. It could mean recording sessions where you talk through things so that people can review them in their own time. It could mean other written material, but that repetition is important. And the different ways of saying things are important. And the second piece that comes from Radical Candor is that as a leader, and I think this actually applies in all cases. It applies in my personal life as a parent. That when I'm constantly telling my kids to pick up their stuff, but when you are tired of saying something, people are only just starting to really hear it. And so that is a second really big piece of clarifying strategy, is that you have to have repetition. You have to be willing to sort of go the distance with it, and get people on board. Uh, so as you move down, individual from an individual contributor perspective, let's say, it's your job to ask questions. It's your job to be eager to understand where the organization is going, how it intends to get there, what are the impacts on you from a people, process, and technology perspective. When you're talking about scaling an organization, if you're going to go from 40 to 100 people in the next, let's call it, year or 18 months, that's a huge change. What is the impact on you? Will you have people that you need to help train up? Will there be new tools put in place because you can't use a spreadsheet to track hours like you can when you're you're a 10-person organization, when you get to be 100 people? What are the real impacts on you and in your everyday life? Understanding how the strategy impacts that. What is the difference in the kinds of technologies you're going to need to learn how to use, especially for organizations that might be going from metal to cloud, might be increasing from a monolith to microservices, increasing deployments, those sorts of things. What do those kinds of changes really mean in terms of impact on you, and how do those strategic changes help you see yourself in the future of this organization? Being willing to go to your leaders, to talk with your peers, and to ask those questions out loud. If you have a question, it is 900% sure that somebody else has the same question. So being willing to ask things out loud is super important to clarify strategy for yourself. This next one is operate in experiments. So this goes back a little bit to item two, in terms of giving grace, but being willing to try things, to fail fast, and then to stop, start, continue. Is this working? Yes, no, maybe. Is this something new that we want to try? The ability to be flexible and be anti-fragile in your approach to how you are solving things is really important. I try to frame things in a positive way, but in this case, it is sort of it is a negative frame. My least favorite thing is when I ask people, why do we do this way? And they say, because that's the way that we've always done it. That is, not, that is, for me, that doesn't fly. I want to constantly be interrogating why we make the decisions that we make, why we do the things that we do, why we use the tools that we use, why we interact a particular way, um, why we have the SLAs that we have with each other and with our customers, all of those sorts of things, and being willing to have small experiments on a rolling basis, and give people the space to fail. And that goes back to what I said earlier. Being willing to fail out loud as a leader is really, really critical, because it gives your team the space to be willing to fail out loud as well. And be able to learn new things, and learn new things very, very quickly. And this last one is be willing to pivot, because some of those experiments, like, frankly, they're just not going to work. Some of them are going to be raging successes, and you're going to want to capitalize on them, and you're going to want to put more energy and resources into them. So when those things are hugely successful, you need to be willing to pivot on other things to be able to lean into those successes. And when things don't work, you need to be able to pivot away from them. You don't want to chase ideas just because you've already made that investment. You want to be able to fail quickly. You want to be able to pivot quickly, and really be willing to say, here's a series of experiments that we have had over the past quarter, or the past 2 quarters. Here's what worked, and we're going to continue to do. Here's what was a giant dumpster fire and we are never going to do again. And here's what was awesome, and we're actually going to double down on that. Um, and being flexible in those ways is critical to success. So we covered a decent amount of ground here, but the sort of one piece that is important to remember, you hear sometimes perfect is the enemy of done, right? You can never get to done if you're always trying to make something perfect. But I like the phrase "perfect is the enemy of anti-fragile" better, because when you are trying to be perfect, you are being rigid. And that's not to say that there should be no rigor. Having a rigorous approach to things is important, but having a rigid approach to things is often really not positive for your personal direction, for the direction of an organization. Being willing to say, we're going to try new things, we're going to fail sometimes, we're going to pivot, and we're going to be transparent about it, is really sort of the cornerstone of success in terms of growth and change, especially in such a rapidly changing space, as cloud technology. So that is the end of the sort of formal presentation. If folks have questions, I'm more than happy to take them.